Well, hello. It's been a while since I've recorded another video. It's probably been like a month, so my apologies. It's been a busy month, surprisingly. We just finished our 8th week of our family homeschool. Um, I've noticed a huge leap between second and third grade. So third grade has gotten a lot more difficult and more time consuming. So I've been pouring a lot of energy into that, into our homeschool, and just adjusting to kind of our new normal. Our schedule is taking a little bit longer this year, more like 3 hours, versus last year was probably more like 2 hours or so. So just making some family adjustments and learning all kinds of new things. So it's been great. But this week we have decided to take a break from our curriculum, and I normally take a break at about 8 weeks of straight school, and you'll kind of, if you're not going through virtual learning through a school district, you're just kind of doing your own thing, you'll kind of learn when your limit is where everybody's kind of getting a little burned out and you need to take a break. And it may not fall around a holiday or whatever, but we've been going for 8 weeks, and so we decided it was time. We were pretty burned out. So we're just gonna lay low this week and read. We're working on Little Town on the Prairie. We're in is that the 6th or the 7th book of the series? And we're just gonna read that for pleasure and take a break from our curriculum. So I hope you all are well, and I hope school's going great for you. I know I've reached out to several of you and have had great conversations about, pluses and minuses that are happening in homeschool and helping problem solve certain things. So always feel free to reach out if you want to just problem solve an issue in your homeschool. And yeah, so what I wanted to talk about today, so it's the reason that it's been a while is I haven't received any questions, which is fine. I'm sorry, I have received one, and I'm gonna respond to it, but I haven't received a lot of questions, and I was kind of waiting for just a topic to inspire me. And yesterday we were coming home from LA, and I was talking to my husband about a particular topic with homeschool, and I just felt really inspired by it, and he said you should make a video about it. So I jotted down some notes, and I'm going to talk about it. So I was remembering with my husband how the read aloud time of school when I was in elementary school was hands down my favorite time of the day. So normally it would be after recess in my school, after lunch and then after recess, and we would be hot and sweaty. And I remember my teacher, the first read alouds I remember was in like 4th grade. So I remember my teacher, Mrs. Perriard, would have us put our heads down, and she'd turn the lights down, and we'd just cool off a little bit. And we'd drink our water, and we'd just kind of cool off, and she would read to us. And one of the first books I remember her reading to us was Where the Red Fern Grows. And I just remember that time being so peaceful and being so interesting, and I remember just loving being read to. Now, I had grown up in a home where my mom read aloud to us a lot. That was a very normal, common thing to be read aloud to in my home growing up. And so, for my school, it was the same. My teachers all would read aloud to us. But for whatever reason, I remember the first real good memories I have of it were with Mrs. Perriard and Where the Red Fern Grows. And I remember, her getting to the end. I'm not going to give any spoilers, but her starting to cry, at this book, and our whole class beginning to cry. We were so caught up in this experience together of reading aloud. And to me, that's such a poignant memory from my elementary school days, and even as I went into middle school and stuff. So I don't know if you've had the experience of being read aloud to from, I don't know a ton about what's happening in public schools today, but from what I understand, reading aloud is becoming less and less common, mostly just because there's so many standards of learning that need to be achieved in such a short amount of time with such limited, manpower, that one of the, easiest things to kind of go, because it's time consuming to read aloud, is to read aloud. So I just felt very inspired this week by encouraging you to read aloud in your home, even if, you know, when our children go back to school, you know, if your children will go back to school, or if they're doing virtual learning and they're, you know, maybe there aren't read alouds being offered as a part of that, you can create a read aloud culture within your home. So reading aloud is a huge part of our homeschool. It's something we do every single day for typically a half hour plus every day, probably quite a bit more than that. I'm probably underestimating, but yeah, in fact, I know I am, but maybe an hour a day we read aloud. But we use Sunlight curriculum, and I just wanted to show you the Sunlight catalogs. Even if you do not do Sunlight, if you do a different homeschool curriculum, I would recommend that you go onto sunlight.com and order their catalog. This is like a 1-year catalog, so it's pretty thick, and they'll send it to you for free. And what I love about it is it's broken down by age and grade. I'll try to get this in here. So this is for grade 5 through 8, ages 10 through 13, and it gives you an entire reading list of recommended reading. So this would be their curriculum for the year, but you could just use it as a really good reading list of appropriate books for that grade and that age, that are historical, that are, you know, maybe based on certain parts of geography, really whatever. So before I even chose to do Sunlight, I ordered the catalog, and I just kind of looked through their reading lists for each age, and they're just like amazing reading lists. But we do use Sunlight, so we buy all of those books, and or we get them from the library, and we do all of those as read alouds. So that's just a quick tip. And then another resource I wanted to share with you, in fact, this whole video pretty much will be sharing resources, is this amazing book called the Read Aloud Family. This book was so full of amazing information about why it's so important that we read aloud to our children, how to go about starting that as a practice. She gives amazing book lists and titles that you can, you know, get from the library or purchase by age. So I highly recommend this. Sarah Mackenzie wrote that. She also has a website and a podcast. She runs something called the Read Aloud Revival. She's very passionate about reading aloud, and she gives incredible book lists by age and grade and all of that. So highly recommend that you check her out. Sarah Mackenzie, and this book is just, I learned so much about reading aloud and how the benefits of it. I mean, I guess I knew that it was good to read to our kids, but like, I don't know, I didn't realize what it does in a child to be read aloud to. I knew what my experience was, that it was amazing, but anyways, I highly recommend that I don't want to just rehash what the book said. I think you should just check it out. So I have some recommendations, but basically what I was talking about with my husband yesterday that made me feel really passionately about this was that the experience of remembering being read aloud to in school, but also feeling in some ways let down about the history that I had been taught growing up, the textbooks that I had been given to learn from, how dry they were, how uninteresting they were to me as a child and a young, person. And therefore, I just didn't really have a lot of interest in history. I do remember watching several movies in school that kind of piqued my interest, things like Schindler's List, and there was another one, but it's slipping my brain right now. But anyways, for the most part, the textbooks that we were given to study history and even science and things like that were really uninspiring to me. So I just wasn't that interested, and I feel like I missed out on whole segments of history and even science that, I was feeling some of that yesterday, just feeling like, wow, I wished that I would have been given just good books to read that, would have inspired me and piqued my interest. And part of why we were talking about this was, we've been going through the Little House on the Prairie series as a family, and my husband said, man, we're just learning so much from this. Like, we had read it earlier in the day in the car. We were actually listening to it, and they had talked in Little House about a dry goods store. And then later we were listening to a podcast. My husband and I were listening to Freakonomics Radio podcast, and they talked about old-fashioned dry goods stores. And the kids instantly like, we just read about that in Little House. Like, we know what that is. That was not a grocery store. They sold, well, I don't know if you can hear, there's lawnmowers out. They're doing our lawn right now. So anyways, my kids were making historical connections between what this podcast was talking about in history. They were talking about the Cold War and what we had talked about in Little House on the Prairie, or what we had read about. So I felt like in some ways like I had been let down by, my education, because I wanted to be making those connections, and like I wanted to remember historical things that I had studied, and I didn't have a lot of interest in history and stuff. Whereas now that we're really digging into good books about these historical things, I feel like I'm learning so much about it. I'm having almost a re-education. So I have like probably millions of examples of books that I could show you, but I'll just show you a few because we're already at like 11 minutes. But, just using good living books, and kind of the difference between living books is living books are just what it sounds like. They're alive. There's lessons to be talked about. They're rich. They spark good conversation. They're about believable characters. They may talk about certain times in history in a rich way. They're not kind of books for no reason, or they're not just dry factual books. They're books that really can come alive, and you can really, they lend themselves well to discussion. So there's a lot of different levels of books. I'd recommend that you get this book, Read Aloud Family. But, one of our favorite things at the littler stages is to just get good picture books that, maybe are not necessarily fiction. They can be nonfiction, but they have great illustrations. This one's about Buzz Aldrin and the space race, and just, the first astronauts. And it's got great pictures. And so we like, those kind of books that aren't necessarily fiction. This one's about Rosa Parks, and it's got great illustrations in it, just really beautiful pictures, and tells about a historical person or a historical event, but in a nicer kind of narrative. Like, it's not just a factual textbook. This is one of our favorites. Thank You, Sarah. It's the story of Thanksgiving. And it's just beautiful. It's a wonderful book. So yeah, I have just like book after book here. This one was great for talking about like immigration and how people came to the United States. It's called When Jesse Came Across the Sea. Yeah. Oh, this is one of our new ones we got. On a Beam of Light. It's the story of Albert Einstein. So the kids learned about that through a very accessible children's book. But as they get a little older, and I'm not talking about much older, because you would be reading these aloud to them. Children can listen to books at up to 3 reading levels ahead of what they can actually read and decode. So you can be reading them some pretty advanced books as long as you're doing the reading aloud. This was a series that we loved. It's called the Orphan's Journey series. There's 4 books in it, but it's about historically the orphan trains. And I don't know how much you know about this, but I'll leave it up to you if you're interested in it. But it was a time in history when orphans were literally taken on these orphan trains, and they would stop at these different cities, and couples would just be waiting at the cities to look at the children and see if there were any that they wanted to adopt. So these children would just kind of make a tour of the United States and hope to be adopted by the end. So we loved this series of books, and it helped us learn a lot about the time and the culture then. 20 and 10 was one of our very first books that we read about the Holocaust. And I wanted my kids to learn about that right away, because I feel like it's very prevalent even today with some things that are happening. I wanted them to, and kids have a very, very deep sense of right and wrong. They already know. I mean, if you just kind of generally explain the Holocaust to your children, they're going to say, wow, that's really messed up. That's wrong. So this was a young reader. We read this they were quite young, kindergarten, first grade, and it's kind of a little bit more gentle intro into what the Holocaust was. It led to very good discussions, 20 and 10. And then, of course, Little House. We're going through this whole series. We've learned so much about pioneer times and the early settlers, and yeah, so I could give you, I mean, if you know me, you know I'm obsessed with books and I just love them, so I could just go on and on and on about different books, living books that we've used to explore history, explore science, explore historical people who are very inspirational to us. But I just want to mostly encourage you, read aloud to your kids. They will enjoy it. It will be so pleasurable for them, and I know you will find it to be very pleasurable, especially the conversations that come out as a result of it. Hope you have a great week. Again, as always, please let me know if there's any topics you'd like for me to cover or explore more. I'm more than willing to do more videos on that, but have a great week.